Two people have identical credit card debt. Both owe $45,000, same amount, same interest rates, same monthly minimum payments. The first person lies awake at night. They check their credit score obsessively. They've stopped investing because they feel like a failure carrying this debt. They're paying minimums while their net worth stagnates. The debt is destroying their financial trajectory and their peace of mind. The second person barely thinks about the debt. They're aggressively investing. Their net worth is growing faster than the debt exists. They know exactly when they'll pay it off, and it doesn't stress them. The debt exists in their life, but it's not controlling their life. Same debt, completely different realities. This isn't about debt tolerance or financial hardship. It's about understanding something fundamental that most people get completely backwards about how debt actually works. Today, I'm going to show you why the amount of debt you carry matters far less than the context surrounding it. Why two people with identical debt loads end up on completely different financial trajectories. And why focusing obsessively on debt payoff before building wealth is one of the most expensive mistakes you can make. Let me start by reframing how you should think about debt entirely. Most financial advice treats debt as a moral failing. You have debt, therefore you're irresponsible. You have debt, therefore you should panic. You have debt, therefore you should sacrifice everything else to eliminate it immediately. This framing is mathematically backwards. Debt isn't inherently good or bad. Debt is a tool. Like any tool, it can be used wisely or foolishly. The question isn't whether you have debt. The question is whether your debt serves your financial goals or sabotages them. Consider the math of two different approaches. Person A has $45,000 in credit card debt at 18% interest. They decide debt elimination is their top priority. They cut all investing. They put every extra dollar toward debt payoff. After 3 years of aggressive payments, they've eliminated the debt. They feel relieved. They finally start investing. They have 27 years until retirement. Person B has the same $45,000 debt, but they make minimum payments while investing aggressively. Over 3 years, they invest $18,000 in index funds, returning 8% annually. By year 3, those investments have grown to approximately $21,000. They eventually pay off the debt too. But now they have $21,000 in accumulated wealth that gets 27 years to compound. By retirement, Person A's 3 years of post-debt investing accumulates to roughly $2.1 million. Person B's 3 years of parallel investing accumulates to roughly $2.3 million. Plus, they still paid off the debt anyway. The difference seems small until you extend the timeline. The psychological relief of eliminating debt quickly feels important in the moment. The mathematical impact of lost compounding time is far larger. But this creates an obvious objection. Isn't high-interest debt expensive? Yes. Credit card debt at 18% costs real money. The $45,000 balance generates roughly $675 monthly in interest alone. That's brutal. Here's what matters, though. If you're earning $80,000 annually and can invest $300 monthly, that investment at 8% returns $1,248 after 10 years. The interest you paid on $45,000 at 18% costs you roughly $48,000 over that same 10 years if you only make minimum payments. The interest definitely hurts, but the hurt is in percentage terms, not absolute terms. You're comparing 18% interest on $45,000 against 8% returns on $18,000 of investments. The investment returns might be smaller in percentage terms, but larger in absolute dollar terms, because you're investing while paying off debt, not instead of paying off debt. This is where the real insight lives. Debt doesn't matter as much as income growth and asset accumulation. A person earning $200,000 with $100,000 in debt is in a fundamentally different position than a person earning $50,000 with $10,000 in debt, even though the second person has proportionally less debt. The high earner can service the debt easily while building wealth elsewhere. The low earner might struggle to pay minimums. The debt-to-income ratio matters far more than the absolute debt amount. Research from the Federal Reserve shows something counterintuitive. Households with some strategic debt actually build wealth faster than households with zero debt. The households with zero debt often got there by avoiding leverage entirely, which means they missed opportunities to invest in education, real estate, or business that leverage enables. The households with strategic debt borrowed money at low rates, invested it in assets returning higher rates, and captured the spread. The difference between borrowing at 4% for a home and investing in index funds, returning 8%, is 4% annual wealth creation that wouldn't exist without the leverage. Let me be clear about something crucial. Not all debt is strategic. Credit card debt used to fund consumption is different from mortgage debt used to buy an appreciating asset. Student loan debt for a degree that increases earning power is different from credit card debt for discretionary spending. The framework that separates good debt from bad debt is straightforward. Good debt finances assets that appreciate or generate income. Bad debt finances consumption that depreciates. A mortgage on a house in a growing market is good debt. A car loan for a reliable vehicle that enables commuting is defensible debt. Student loans for education that increases earning power are good debt. Credit card debt for vacations, restaurants, or depreciating goods is bad debt. Personal loans for consumption are bad debt. Payday loans are bad debt. The distinction matters because good debt creates optionality. The person with a mortgage owns an appreciating asset that builds equity. The person with a car loan can get to work and earn income. The person with strategic student loans increased their earning power. But here's where conventional debt advice completely fails people. It treats all debt equally. It tells you to eliminate all debt before investing. This sounds responsible. It's actually mathematically destructive. Consider someone with $80,000 in student loan debt at 4% interest and $300,000 in income. Conventional advice says eliminate the debt before investing. They stop investing and put $2,000 monthly toward loan payoff. In roughly 3 years, the debt is gone. Then they start investing. Now consider someone in identical circumstances who invests $1,000 monthly while paying $1,000 monthly toward loans. The debt takes longer to eliminate, but the investments compound for those extra years. By the time both people reach retirement, the second person has substantially more wealth despite carrying debt longer. The person paying down good debt while investing is capturing the mathematical advantage of the interest rate spread. They're borrowing at 4% and investing at 8%, pocketing the 4% difference. This requires psychological comfort with carrying debt. And that's where most people fail. They feel morally obligated to eliminate debt quickly, even when the math doesn't support it. Here's the pattern I see repeatedly. Someone inherits money or receives a bonus. Their first instinct is debt payoff. They eliminate their $50,000 student loans. They feel amazing. They've won against debt. What they've actually done is convert a financial tool that could compound wealth into psychological relief. The inheritance could have been invested for 30 years. Instead, it was used to pay off debt that they would have eventually paid off anyway. The relief is real, but the cost is permanent. That money can never be reinvested. Those years of compounding can never be recovered. Let me introduce a framework that separates people who build wealth from people who don't. It's called the debt-to-asset ratio. Track not your debt amount, but your debt-to-asset ratio. This is total debt divided by total assets. Someone with $100,000 in debt and $500,000 in assets has a 0.2 ratio. Someone with $20,000 in debt and $80,000 in assets has a 0.25 ratio. The second person has proportionally more debt relative to assets, even though the absolute debt is lower. The debt-to-asset ratio reveals whether debt is being used as leverage to build assets or as evidence of living beyond means. A 0.2 ratio while assets grow indicates strategic debt use. A 0.5 ratio indicates too much debt. Wealth builders focus on asset accumulation while maintaining reasonable debt. Debt obsessors focus on debt elimination while assets stagnate. Here's a practical principle. Only stress about debt when it prevents you from building assets. If you earn $150,000 and your debt payments are $800 monthly, that's 6% of gross income. That leaves substantial room to invest. Stress isn't warranted. If you earn $150,000 and debt payments are $3,500 monthly, that's 28% of gross income. That's constraining. Stress is warranted and debt reduction becomes important. The threshold where debt becomes genuinely problematic is roughly when debt payments exceed 20% of gross income for consumer debt. At that point, debt is genuinely limiting options and asset building becomes difficult. Below that threshold, strategic debt combined with aggressive investing outperforms debt elimination combined with delayed investing. Let me illustrate with specific numbers. Sarah has $200,000 income and $80,000 in student loan debt at 4% interest. Monthly payments are $830. That's 5% of gross income. She chooses to maintain the debt while investing $2,000 monthly in index funds. Over 20 years, her investments accumulate to roughly $1 million. She pays $199,000 in loan payments total. She ends retirement with $1 million in assets and zero debt. Now consider Marcus in identical circumstances. He chooses to eliminate the debt first. He invests $1,170 monthly toward loan payoff and $830 monthly toward investments. The debt is eliminated in roughly 5 years. Then he invests $2,000 monthly. Over 20 years, his investments accumulate to roughly $900,000. He paid the same $199,000 in loans. He ends retirement with $900,000 in assets instead of $1 million because he lost 5 years of aggressive investing during the debt payoff period. Sarah built $100,000 more wealth while carrying debt longer. The psychological satisfaction of debt freedom cost Marcus genuine wealth. Now I want to address the emotional component because that's where most people's debt decisions actually come from. Carrying debt creates psychological discomfort. Our culture treats debt as failure. You internalize the message that having debt means something is wrong with you. This emotional weight drives people to eliminate debt quickly, often at the expense of logical financial decisions. The relief of debt payoff is real and immediate. The cost of lost compounding is abstract and delayed. But here's what research on hedonic adaptation shows. The relief of paying off debt lasts approximately 18 to 24 months. Then your emotional baseline returns to normal. The debt freedom stops feeling special and just feels normal. Meanwhile, the investment you didn't make stops compounding. That cost is permanent. Compare this to the emotion of watching your net worth grow year after year through steady investing. The satisfaction compounds. The emotional reward extends indefinitely. Strategic debt holders experience ongoing satisfaction of growing assets. Debt obsessors experience brief satisfaction of eliminating debt followed by regret when they realize they could have built more wealth differently. The framework for thinking about your specific debt situation looks like this. First, categorize your debt. Student loans, mortgages, and business loans are strategic. Credit card debt, car loans, and personal loans are typically not. Second, calculate your debt service as a percentage of gross income. Below 15% is healthy. Between 15% and 25% is manageable. Above 25% requires attention. Third, calculate the interest rate on your debt. Below 5% is low. Between 5% and 10% is moderate. Above 10% is high. Fourth, compare that interest rate to historical market returns. Markets return roughly 8% to 10% annually. If your debt costs less than 5%, investing while maintaining debt is mathematically superior. If your debt costs more than 10%, payoff becomes more attractive. Fifth, assess your psychological comfort. If carrying debt creates constant anxiety that prevents clear thinking, that anxiety is a real cost that offsets mathematical advantage. Your actual strategy should align with all 5 factors. Someone with $50,000 in student loans at 3%, earning $120,000, with debt service at 8% of income, who is psychologically comfortable carrying debt, should absolutely invest aggressively while maintaining the loans. Someone with $40,000 in credit card debt at 22%, earning $60,000, with debt service at 28% of income, who is psychologically stressed by debt, should focus on debt elimination. Most people exist somewhere in between, where either strategy could work, but one aligns better with their specific numbers and psychology. Here's something practical you can do immediately. Document your actual debt. List the balance, interest rate, and monthly payment for each debt. Calculate your total debt service as a percentage of gross income. Calculate the interest rate spread between your debt and potential investment returns. This isn't to cause anxiety, it's to create clarity. Most people have never done this math. Once you do, the optimal strategy becomes obvious. The person earning $250,000 with $200,000 in debt has very different math than the person earning $60,000 with $30,000 in debt, even though the debt-to-income ratios seem similar. Income growth, not debt payoff, is what actually creates financial security. The person who focuses on earning $250,000 and using strategic debt as leverage to invest builds far more wealth than the person earning $75,000 and obsessing over debt payoff. But this creates obvious pushback. What if debt becomes unmanageable? What if interest rates increase? What if income drops? These are real concerns. They're also mostly addressed through maintaining an emergency fund and avoiding consumption debt. If you carry strategic debt with a sustainable debt service ratio and maintain an emergency fund, these risks are manageable. The person with $100,000 in mortgage debt, $200,000 in investments, and a 6-month emergency fund is far more protected than the person with zero debt, $50,000 in investments, and no emergency fund. The conventional advice treats debt as the enemy to be defeated. The real enemy is insufficient assets combined with inadequate income. Debt is often a tool for addressing that enemy, not the enemy itself. Here's the reframe that separates people who build wealth from people who don't. Stop asking, how do I eliminate debt? Start asking, how do I maximize assets relative to debt? Someone with $100,000 in debt and $500,000 in assets is in better financial shape than someone with zero debt and $200,000 in assets, even though the second person has no debt. The first person has options. They can downsize assets to eliminate debt if needed. They have margin. The second person is fragile despite being debt-free. The mathematics are clear. Strategic debt combined with aggressive asset building produces better outcomes than debt obsession combined with delayed investing. The emotional comfort of debt freedom is real but temporary. The wealth gap created by different compounding timelines is permanent. Your 30 seconds and 40 seconds represent the critical window where this math matters most. Every year spent focused on debt elimination instead of asset building during these decades costs hundreds of thousands in retirement wealth. This doesn't mean debt is irrelevant. It means debt should be evaluated in context, not treated as inherently evil. A person earning $300,000 with $150,000 in student loan debt is in a fundamentally different situation than a person earning $60,000 with $15,000 in debt, even though the first person has more absolute debt. The framework for thinking about your debt isn't emotional or moral, it's mathematical. Does the debt enable asset building? Is the interest rate low relative to investment returns? Is the debt service manageable as a percentage of income? Do I have reserves for emergencies? If you answer yes to all 4 questions, maintaining debt while investing is superior to debt elimination. If you answer no, debt reduction becomes the priority. Most people have never asked themselves these questions. They've simply internalized cultural messages about debt being bad. Once you do the math, the confusion disappears, and the optimal path becomes clear. The person who builds wealth does so by accumulating assets faster than they accumulate debt. The person who stays broke does so by obsessing over debt elimination, while assets never accumulate. Your 40 seconds will pass. The decade will be consumed either building assets or obsessing over debt. The only question is which version of your future you're creating through the decision about how to approach the debt that currently exists in your life.